We are going to start now the panel. We are kind of short with the time, so we are going to use sharp the hour that has been given to us, so we need to speak fast. And the questions also need to be very sharp and to the point. So I think that I would start by the question that was posed in the last remark that Caspar Koenig did somehow. So in asking myself what exactly or how can a Catholic background person that knows absolutely nothing about religion addressing the question of Reformation talk about what is it that may interest me or us in this constellation, it really touches upon something that Caspar said, but I would not name in the same manner, which is the question of belief. So if there is something that distinguishes the Reformation, in my opinion, is a new importance or the beginning of the importance of the question of one's sentiment and belief in our political life, but also in our social behavior. And concretely speaking, is the question of sincerity. The question of sincerity has been used as a new kind of moral order to position a behavior in the public sphere versus, for example, the anti-sincerity wall, which is Catholicism, in favor of theater and in favor, of course, of irony, and in hiding exactly those feelings because they may be used rhetorically for the right wing, just to summarize. So in talking about the question of aesthetics, we always forget that we think that we are defending something which is radically different from knowledge. And it's true that in the last 2 decades, we have been all the time talking about the production of knowledge, and that we have been emphasizing that idea that knowledge is exactly what defines our relationship with cultural production and artistic practice, letting aside the question of behavior, but also contrasting knowledge all the time with the question of aesthetics. But if aesthetics is perception, and if perception is experience, then experience is what determines what a behavior may or may not be. So for me, this question comes also at the center when we are talking now, for example, on what all these cases about, the going beyond feminism, or a feminism of the ideals, or a feminism of the knowledge, towards a feminism of the behavior. So, of course, every man educated knows that he should not harass or use power against a woman. But we know that knowing it, or the knowledge, was definitely not enough. Not even the sincerity with everyone in public would say that I would never do that. So knowledge and sincerity are at stake at the question of behavior. So we have been producing a gap with or in between knowledge and behavior. And I think that this gap is the interesting gap that has been already announced in the Reformation. And my question to my friends sharing the podium today with me, Christina of the Hour, which is a philosopher and expert in the question of the Reformation, Monika Szewczyk, a curator.
Szewczyk, no?
Yeah, well, I'm from Spain, I think, and you are majority. And I have, I have phonetic bulla, so I can mispronounce your names without going to hell. And I'm going to read it now. Agata Jakubowska, it's even worse, Agata, which is an historian and an expert on the question of women's position in art history. So that's my question to you. I think we are going to start by analyzing this new interest that we have, not only in what we need to say or write, or even connect with politics and contextualize, but also new behaviors in our disciplines, but also in the social, in museography, and so on and so forth. And I would start by giving the word to Christina.
Thank you, Chus. Thank you very much. You already gave me the keywords, knowledge and behavior, and I'm going to ask, whose knowledge is it about? And when I was thinking over then, I found it fascinating that in the Reformation, the reformers did not only rediscover the gift character of God's grace, but also the text character of God's word. So Erasmus of Rotterdam did research on the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament and compared them. And Luther, of course, translated the Bible into everyday German. And he invented new words which stayed in German until today. So at the basis of that business, comparing manuscripts, translating the Bible in everyday language, there is the conviction that God's word is not the Bible. God's word is Christ, and Christ is, as Luther says, clothed in the pampers of Scripture, the pampers of a small baby, very worldly, immanent, fleshy thing. So the Scriptures testify about God. They're not God's words themselves. And this has been the root of what Paul Tillich then called the Protestant principle of distinguishing between what is and what is not, and expressing the what is not, what you cannot talk about, God and transcendence, in a language of what is, while keeping that difference between what is and what it's not. So talking about something as if it were that way, but knowing that it's not that way, but still having no other way of talking. So they opened up the way for thinking and talking about language, talking about God. But what they did not reflect is their own perspective. They thought, Luther and Erasmus and all the men, the theologians that followed, that their way of speaking and thinking was the human way of thinking and speaking, the immanent way, the universal way. And it took the women thinker, the feminist theologians, the feminist philosophers to point out that language, too, always is part of a certain history, culture, skin color, education. You know it. So it took feminist theologians to point out that language, yes, is construction of what is, meaning referring to what is not, but it's constructed by those who are in power. So what happens if you take the language of those who are not in power, who are powerless? And so we have the need for, and the Protestant legitimation for, a diversity of perspectives on talking about what is not, new languages which are not idolatrous, which are not identifying one way of speaking with the truth, but also which are not irrelevant, which don't lose the meaning for the rest of the people whose language is not spoken. So whose knowledge is constructed by whom, and how does that change speaking about God, believing in God, and acting in this world as a believer or as an unbeliever?
Very good statement. Monika, you follow?
So I thought to talk about belief in women in some ways. Maybe it's a good follow-up to Jörg's presentation, which I thought was also an illustration of a lot of beliefs in women. He was projecting onto the image of Lucretia, or also reflecting on projections of images of Lucretia. And I'm kind of bringing questions, I guess, more than anything, which is to ask, what do we now believe women to be? And also doing a little bit of wordplay and following your presentation, thinking of what kind of belief in themselves is lodged inside women. What do women think today they are, if they are somehow having to work with all these archetypes like Lucretia, like Judith, like Mary, like all of them. And I think it's important to think about women plural, because it also kind of juxtaposes to the monotheistic frame that Catholicism, the Reformation, and all the monotheistic religions actually posit for us. So I wanted to share with you the example of an artist called Irena Hajduk, who has founded an oral corporation, Jugo Export. I'm a decorated member of the Army of Beautiful Women, which this corporation is somehow building. And the military strain of this corporation comes from the fact that Yugo Export is actually an avatar of sorts. It used to be a corporation in the former Yugoslavia. It went under. Its kind of shadow, Yugo Import, persists as an arms manufacturer and importer, makes a lot of money. Yugo Export, as a textile manufacturer, could not make that kind of money. So once it went under, Irena Hajduk incorporated it in the United States, where corporations are people. So she, Yugo Export, is blind, non-aligned, oral corporation. It is invested in the sense that it is invested in oral tradition, so conjuring imagery, rather than always having visuals. There's a lot of narration involved in the way that the work of Yugo Export is presented. And it somehow uses existing infrastructures and is very interested in infrastructure. And I think this somehow answers the question of practice and of behavior in certain ways. As a bridge to believe, I'm thinking of this quote that opens the book of Peter Sloterdijk, You Must Change Your Life, Du musst dein Leben ändern, which is a quote from Nietzsche's Daybreak, and it goes, practice, practice, practice. Soon enough, belief will make an appearance. You can be sure of that. And I think that also has a lot to do with the first presentation and this notion of method. And somehow putting practice first ahead of belief, rather than having this kind of nominal relationship where I believe in God is something that you say and then it's supposed to somehow change your behavior. It doesn't quite work that way. So Yugo Export began with incorporation in a very physical sense. It actually outfitted the entire workforce of Documenta 14 with an ergonomic Borosana shoe, which I am wearing. These shoes were first produced in Vukovar, in what is now Croatia, but used to be the former Yugoslavia. And that factory actually combined the different ethnicities in Yugoslavia in the production of the shoe, not in any kind of overt, politically correct way, but just by the fact that people worked there, basically. And one of the main kind of ways in which Yugo Export manifests itself in the world is through a performance of sorts, which is called spinal discipline, which involves walking, women simply walking. In this outfit that I am wearing these shoes, this dress, which is called the Army of Beautiful Women dress, number 1. The number 2 is for the summer. And they walk with a book on their head. I'm not going to demonstrate this because it might prove awkward, but the whole point is that belief in women begins with a kind of posture. One has to practice the posture, have a straight spine. The interior of the body is very important, and then all the limbs, everything is free, and you can be confident. And there is a whole set of images that I can show you, but I think we're running out of time. So what I will actually do is just show you a little bit of the spinal discipline performance as it occurred in Kassel, because it's a very strong image as well. And then we can just look at these women. It's interesting that walking in the street is something that is a kind of controversy for women. These were all girls recruited out of the Documenta 14 staff, so they kind of took on an extra role in the exhibition. And they really enjoyed basically the practice of walking with a straight spine in the street, past various iconic sites of Documenta and in different neighborhoods. You can see here they're wearing a book on their head to ensure a kind of straight spine. This is them in front of Marta Minuchin's Parthenon of books. And there's something quite interesting, I think, in the use of the book, since Luther, of course, did something with the book, the Bible, in terms of putting it in people's hands and taking advantage of the possibilities of the printing press at the time. The book became a kind of tool that is very important. And in this instance, the book can, of course, be read. It is a source of knowledge. It's, in fact, a book that the artist has made. But the book is also an object these days, because we are in the era of very non-material transmissions of information, so books can become other things as well. And in this case, the book is an object. It, behaves according to the laws of gravity. It can also help you have a straight spine. So this is just a quick insight into this kind of embodied, incorporated idea of Yugo export and the army of beautiful women, beautiful because they are confident, I think, and therefore believe in themselves. So I will conclude with that.
Okay, I would like to contribute to this question about knowledge and behavior with several remarks about education. And, yes, thank you. And I would like to start with a question, a quite simple question, whether the history of education and women, and especially in terms of education, art education, is a story of success or not. And I think we can answer both yes and no. It is a story of success because if we take into consideration the whole process of giving access to education to all women that started actually with Reformation, and if we take into consideration the fight, I could say, of women to have full access to art schools, and also to have identical curricula in art schools, then we can say that yes, we succeeded because women students they obtained it, yes. But on the other hand, several researches were made that show that actually it is not a full success. And I am showing you cover of one of report. It was prepared by Katarzyna Kozyra Foundation, and they started with observation that it refers to Polish art academies, but I think that Polish art academies are not, I am just treating them as an example here, not an exception. So they started with an observation that actually there is a great disproportion between female students and women employed at academies, and that only bigger proportion is only actually in theological faculties. Yes, and so it was surprising for them. And what I find most interesting in this report is that women students definitely feel that they do not receive big social capital, that male students receive much bigger social capital during their education from their teachers, basically. And also what they underlined is that women students are much more likely to have a lower self-esteem, which refers very much to what you said. And generally speaking, so the curricula are identical, but when female students finish or graduate from art schools, they actually, as I said, the level of self-esteem and the level of their social capital is much lower. And it makes me ask, so what should we do in a sense? Yes, most of us are teachers. We are sometimes regular teachers or irregular, but we are teachers. And I think I perceive it as a kind of prescription for us. But also I would like to say I would like to tell you something about what I think that women students, young artists, what they do to somehow compensate for this lacks in education. I have been working on a research project that is devoted to women-only exhibitions in Poland, history of women-only exhibitions, and one of interesting observations was that the number of women-only exhibitions is increasing very quickly. But I give you here numbers, but in 90s, for example, just 10 only women exhibitions were organized in Poland. At the beginning of 2000s, about 30, but now every year about 10 or more women-only exhibitions are organized. And very often by young women, and very often they are local initiatives. I am not talking about like blockbuster feminist exhibitions that are very popular and big institutions organize them, but there is a number, I will show you just slides of different initiatives in Poland, very local, as I said, local initiatives. For example, something that is called Ladies' Bath, that is organized in Gdańsk, or OLES Festival, that is devoted to lesbian arts festival, and again, very small local initiative in the city of Częstochowa tied to women. I perceive these initiatives as actually similar to what you said about these performances of the Army of Beautiful Women, in a sense that it is a way to give themselves and to give one another what education did not give them. So it's in a sense of supporting themselves because education was not able to sufficiently build their social capital.
Probably a question for first, I start with Monika. It's true, and it's related to the question of Agata, the question of confidence. And the question of confidence, it always comes back to the question of woman, because the question of confidence has to do with the question of virtues, and also the projection of those virtues into women more than into men. Also into men, but particularly into women. And it goes back to the idea of sincerity. I think I would never celebrate Luther, of course, and I am on the side of insincerity, because...
You're in the side of insincerity.
Yes. So if I would play the Catholic that I'm not, I would say that I would always go for theatricality and for the right of not showing, even if I'm confident. So the question is, how do you read these kind of gestures? I think on the one hand, how does this performance or these acts of reenacting the lack of confidence into women also is not reinforcing this cliché or that expectation that we should be confident? In other words, we could also be completely non-confident and still have power, because this is also possible. So it's not only confidence that brings you to power. There's also the possibility of the country is logically thinkable. So how would you, for example, answer to that? How are these not also reinforcing, or even, let's call it just for an hypothesis, naive, this straight walking? Why should a woman not back walking, or just not walking, or just not showing it, or not trained for that?
It's completely voluntary. So I think that the question is never a kind of coerciveness. And the goal is not necessarily power in confidence, I would say, actually. It's maybe more to do with a certain sense of inner drive, which is not devoid of doubt. I think I'm reading right now, actually inspired by this whole colloquium, I'm reading Erich Fromm's Escape from Freedom, and he makes a kind of comparison between the Lutheran era and the rise of Hitler, and looks at Luther as a populist figure that answers the kind of dissatisfaction of the masses with a certain type of abolition of doubt that is not really giving full confidence to these people. It's a kind of erasure or robbing. And I think that it's really important to think of confidence as something in and of itself, in a way, and belief as this kind of internal thing somehow. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's about this kind of notion of power, that power has to be taken from somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. It's something like, I think a good analogy is the building of muscle. You're not trying to take power from anyone, you're building your own muscle, you're exercising. It feels really good. And in terms of this idea of, I think I get what you're saying in terms of, irony and the certain types of things that are given up when women as victims of a kind of oppression, etc., is introduced into the frame. And I can maybe only answer that in terms of a particular kind of temperature that Irena gives to her work. One of the first publications I encountered of hers is called "Hope is the Greatest Whore." So there you have, it's actually a saying from the Serbian, a Serbian saying that kind of took on great currency during the bombing of Belgrade, and it's basically something that she introduced into a more of an American sphere after a certain kind of dissolution, maybe with the politics of hope that Obama introduced. And I think there is a kind of Diogenesian dog philosophy behind how she posits the woman. There's also the sound piece that she made, which in a way is a precursor to the founding of Yugo Export. And this is an answer to your sense, which I totally share, actually, that not everything needs to be shown. Her way of putting forward an aesthetics, and it's definitely putting forward a kind of aesthetic and an economic regime, is very much through oral, gestures. So one piece she has, which is called Seductive Exacting Realism, is a kind of long dialogue between two female voices talking about politics and art and incorporation. We don't have, the time to really feel what is happening, and maybe I'm not transmitting it very well, but it's definitely not an attempt to take humor out, to kind of posit women as victims that are reenacting anything. They are exercising. It's a practice. Mm-hmm. It's not really. It's sort of this very basic yoga, almost like formation, and it has 1,001 possibilities as to where people can take it. So I want to give it its warmth and its humor if I didn't transmit it the first time.
No, you did, but
yeah.
I was just, playing the evil moderator. But it's related to the question that Agata was posing for me, which is fundamental, and I think I'm obsessing with that, which is how can we educate differently? Because only through this kind of difference, a different result may occur in the culture and in the artworks, and how can we talk about these things without talking about those words like confidence or sincerity? And then, of course, and that's a question also for you, Agata, how you perceive it. In countries like mine, for example, like this new wave of sincerity made that many programs, which are the embodiment of knowledge, started to be really the programs defending the role of women in the presence, the research, like all of a sudden, that was kind of like it was a moment of openness and a moment of appear, like it was completely different, and at the same time, it was an immense closeness. In other words, I never saw so many male museum directors as in my country talking about feminism and the role of women and how they want to construct the collections differently. And on the other hand, it really felt like completely an non-adequate appropriation. So that would be the knowledge of what we learn, and we could learn it, we could rehearse it, we could exercise it, but then it would never become a behavior, a true behavior, not in the teams, not in the language, not in the communication. And it goes also back to what Christina was saying, like this kind of play with a language that wants to say something that cannot say, and then it's also kind of mimicking a plurality that is not there. It's not really there because it's not part of the experience. It's just part of the knowledge. And the only thing that happened is that things started to be more and more separated. So good museums with good programs, good festivals with the right woman, and the rest. So, and that's my question, like, how do you see this evolution, or how can you just surpass this problem, for example?
For me, that is very important to distinguish with feminist exhibitions, feminist programs, and so on, organized by mainstream institutions, by powerful curators, and so on, that I actually like, they use feminism as a fashion, yes, more like a fashionable subject. And it is important to distinguish this from some kind of renewal of 70s self-organization of women. I see it very strongly that that's why I showed these exhibitions that are really local exhibitions organized by women who are not recognized even nationally, but it is very important for them again, as it was in the 70s, to self-organize because they feel that they should somehow help each other, yes, in a sense. So I don't think that evolution, yes, you ask about evolution, that is, I don't know how to answer this question, but if I can somehow turn into Monika, if you don't mind, because that was interesting for me when you showed you this performance. I saw it before, but it is actually what I'm thinking about self-confidence, building self-confidence, or by discipline. I am used to thinking that you can somehow build your confidence by, I don't know, dancing, yes? There is this nice saying that if I cannot dance, I will not join your revolution. It is one of the feminist sayings. So that is interesting for me, and I think that most of you saw this Mermaid's Tale series, and it's very much, actually, when I saw these pictures from this performance, it very much reminds me of the series. These women dressed
Sirens.
yeah.
Singing,
She actually
luring.
calls them sirens sometimes.
Yeah. So that's interesting for me. So that's I would like to ask you maybe. So how is it building self-confidence, this kind of discipline? It also comes to the question when I was reading about Reformation education. Yes, I am obviously not a specialist. It's like everyone repeats it, almost everyone. But it was interesting for me to learn this discussion about whether access for women to education, for all women to education, whether was it good or not. I mean, we know it was good, but what was the result, the exact result of it? Whether the result was like a strengthening of obedience of women, or whether the result was like giving them more power, more confidence, and that was interesting. So and I think it is related to the performance you showed. In a sense.
Yeah, I think that one has to keep in mind that it's a self-inflicted kind of discipline, in the sense that it's not women being disciplined to walk in a certain way. It's really fun. And I think that there is a certain type of way in which progressive causes tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think, in terms of shunning certain very effective techniques of empowerment or self-empowerment.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I do think that, you know, instilling this discipline is something that looks almost fascistic, you know, it's an army of beautiful women, but of course, they're not out there to take power from anybody or inflict a kind of violence. It's a certain kind of reserve strength.
No,
Yeah.
and I also don't know how to actually address the question, but yeah, we are kind of revolving around words that cannot name what we actually want to say. On the one hand, but we say no, it's not a question of power. What if it is a question of power, or what if it is a question of power, but as a question of relevance? Because the question of power can be, let's say, we can make a myriad out of what power is, because it does not name only one behavior. So it names relations. And the question of how relations are named, but also how they are exercised, is for me really fundamental, because it's also not a question of women. And the fact that I'm obsessed with the education of women is probably for the sake of men. So, and that's also what Agata was saying. On the one hand, I'm completely positive and happy and embracing all the practices and self-organization and the confidence that we all women can win, but actually I don't want to be in the room only with women. I don't want to share my life only with women, and I would love to see men participating or being part of exactly that. So the question is what, the plurality can affect these genders as they are in their female and male, but also in their non-binarity, but how can we go through that, And this is also the question you were in your statement, is in how far Luther or all this naming that the language cannot name, but just insisting in that pluralism is also insisting in a form of language that is reinforcing identity politics, that is reinforcing a difference that cannot mingle, that cannot meet, because in the non-nameable there's always a defensiveness that one cannot go into. So how is it? I think that's the Reformation and the fact that we are always referring to Western culture, to monotheistic religions in kind of secular context, mostly art and culture, not only, but mostly. So how are these notions still around that, in your opinion?
I think, ironically, from what I've heard now, you discussing, and I find it very interesting, I think that Protestant tradition is much more non-fundamentalistic as other approaches. Because of that, what cannot be named. And that's not only a Western tradition, because it's already apparent in the Jewish tradition, which is an Oriental religion by its origins, that you shall not make a picture, an image of God. So the ultimate is cannot be reached. So that there is, what you say, insincerity from the beginning, because the sincere would be authenticity, to get it, to get to power or to meaning or to equality, whatever. And saying that all we can reach is a shell. And the Reformer said the shell is the words of the Bible. And the feminist thinker said the shell is male language and metaphors, or female, or Western, or black, white, whatever metaphors. So there are a lot of shells, and we can only talk about the shells. Or if I might cite the play at the beginning, we're talking about methods here, and not about the goal in itself. And whereas I would disagree from a theological standpoint, it's not a universal source of energy. This is religious as well again, or feminism and this strive for equality could get religious, or for power and beauty.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if I was ever talking about feminism, actually. I kind of want to leave feminism out of it, because that's why I said women. Okay. I just want to be a little bit more down to the ground about it, on my feet. Feminism, I think, is another issue, because I do think it does have this tendency to create an image, conjure an image, even if it's a verbal one, of women only. And I think that, I agree with you, Chus, there is something kind of strange about leaving men out of the picture. And I think that
getting it real, whatever, or getting it right, the relationship between men and women could be something like a goal.
That's where I think it's also a question, meaning, just to pose it, every time we say this or that religion is not that fundamentalist, or it possesses a potentiality that other spiritualities or other forms of naming do not have, at the end, there is a problem of identity and identification in religion, and in monotheistic religion, that is the identification with God and with the virtues of God. And actually, the equality that we are trying to claim with men is also a trap, because it's not, the same equality I would claim with every animal and with nature. So the question is how to even make it more complex, not simplified only to that polarity or this kind of thing, but it's very complex, because even in culture, like the identification is power and man and God, and all that line and all this etymology is there. So, and it is there in the Catholic and in the Protestant, and I suppose in many other religions that I don't know. But it's, and that's what is also very important not to talk about feminism, because that's also a historical movement that also identify woman with woman. But what if I want to totally identify with men as well as I want to identify with a river? And then the thing starts to be complex if I say, but I'm not a poet and I'm not a mystic. So what if I say this is just philosophy? And what if this may reverse questions of language that affect the organization of cultural production and artistic production? So, and that it starts to be super complex. And that's what I think, what you are all trying to say is exactly that, how complex it is to use even the words that we are using, like, confidence. We agree, there is a big problem on it. But the very moment that you name it, then my reaction is that I want to be as lazy and cute and radical as a young man in the academy, because, confidence is not exactly the way to go. So how can we navigate all that?
But you can be very confidently lazy and cute if you're in it, if you're into it. Then that's your confidence. I think in answer to also what is like, if we're not going after power, then what are we going after? I think it's comfort. I mean, for me, it's really, ergonomic comfort is one thing, but it's kind of an at-ease way of being open and actually having more exchanges, more transactions, not to sound like a hippie about it, because I think there are roots to that kind of an attitude, probably in more, animistic traditions, which we are also living with in many ways and have been incorporated into Christianity and Judaism and Islam and all of it. So, I think I wonder if we try not to set up false, like paper tigers and false kind of, demons that then we fight against and we can topple them, but then we're left with what? I think that the question is to, like, I wanted to flip back the question back to you, because I know you're busy with a kind of rethinking of curriculum. You're leading an art academy and you're also working on this institute. And I'm curious if you can say a little bit more about the basis for reforming this kind of, as you call it, female-oriented curriculum, or
No.
what is it? No.
No, not at all. And that's exactly the challenge on education, just to go out of the subject, to re-enter it from another door. So the question is just to bring the relations and the connectivity, but this is an answer that I'm giving to myself. I'm completely playing it now in public when I'm not at all ready. But what I see is that it would, in order to make things more complex, not to give the impression that comfort is actually the result of being happy with the small corner that has been given to me, or confidence is the result of virtue that I need to embody in the social, but for men as well. I'm not talking about the woman. I'm talking about genders, about question about all the genderization of, like, the relationships in the social, and how education, in my case is art education, but any form of education affects those relations. It's a question of taking it out of the subject matter, so not making it even a subject. And how do you do that? And how, and where then should you go? How can you make first everyone very uncomfortable? like for example the teachers, just by making them teach something that they are not confident themselves? How can they talk in a language that they cannot perform in a super direct and bold manner? How can they use examples that they actually never wanted to refer to? So things like that is, this is part of the conversations that we are having as a group, like as an institute that is dealing with education of art. Is it possible? And it's true that everyone is giving similar answers as the ones that you are giving, that in exercising, there is an immense potential, and that exercising affects behavior, and that behavior needs to get closer to what we know, because right now there is a little bit of a gap, if not a big gap there.
What does that mean? Exercising has to get closer to what we know.
Well, exactly what I was saying in a very simple, stupid, general manner at the beginning. We know you shouldn't abuse. We know it, but people abuse. So the behavior of the abuser is a behavior that very often is based on a knowledge of not doing it. So there is that gap. And that gap in non-moral, I think I'm not entering into morality, I'm just exercising it in a behavioral way, so that you should not, like...
Do we know when it is abused and when it's not?
Well, I think so. I'm certain that just to referring to both cases of like one, the Weinstein case or Art Forum, I think that those that are talking, they know what they felt, and as every woman probably in this room, they know.
No, I'm not questioning the woman's knowledge. I'm questioning the men's or the abuser's knowledge. So I'm just trying to make it a bit more complex. Even if you say we have the knowledge, and now the behavior is going to be go closer.
No. I don't know. It have to. I'm saying that it would be like that's an interesting research, because as you. I cannot know if they know, but I can assume that they know, because for the context and so it's an hypostasy. I cannot think that they know, but I cannot demonstrate it. But I need, like, we need to work on that kind of working hypothesis of that they know, but this is not preventing from not doing it. But this is just a stupid example, because very fast it can jump into morals, and that's not what I want to talk about here. So, that's something that we are sensing. That's in the conversations that we are having, and that's a difficulty that we are also having, because we don't know exactly how to talk about it, and that's in the rooms when we meet, for example. But I would open it to the audience.
I was wondering why I am feeling so inclined to a slight sadness when I hear about this Hajduk project, if it's depraved of irony and double meanings. Because it puts me even further back than the 70s. Or as we just conversed, why aren't there big and small and fat and black and white and yellow women walking down these streets? That's one thing. And then I was thinking, why didn't they do self-defense to get a better posture and feeling more confident? It's more like self-empowerment, and I think that's an exclusively therapeutic thing to do.
To answer your question about the diversity of women who are participating in the project, it's all that. I don't know if you saw the photographs, but there were women of all shades. The whole workforce of Documenta 14 was all sizes, and they all wore the Borosana shoes. I think there's a lot of irony in there. It's definitely putting economies into play. It also is the blackness of the shoe is a kind of comment on class, because originally when the Borosana was produced, it was produced in blue for maintenance workers and in white for, let's say, medical staff and, these types of things. So the black is a kind of leveling out of these subtle class structures that still exist in this kind of socialist paradigm of a classless paradise. But I don't know what I did to take the irony and the humor out of this project, but
nothing.
It's there.
I think it's
I think the problem is that maybe because it's related really to a specific time, and where it makes so much sense, because you were expert when you think of it. This like walking with a book on your head. It's a typical exercise of, in German you say die höhere Tochter, the higher daughter. This expression I think doesn't really exist in, or a similar thing in English. So it's an education. It's part of an education of women that are not meant to work. Yeah, they just get educated to be then educated women, and so and then it makes a lot of sense to kind of have this. Then there is something self-empowering, but in the class context of doing this not as something that is given to you, but you decided on yourself doing it, and yes, in a society that is completely about self-regulation, and where women are anyhow in our society the ones who do things in the proper way, while the men are not doing it in the proper way. I mean, this is the distinction that we are living, and the men don't play the rules. The women play the rules, and the men don't. I mean, this is the power asymmetry that we have nowadays, and in that context, yes, it's. I think I understand. I completely understand why you're irritated about it. Yes.
It reminds me the Cultural Revolution in China in the late 60s, when all of a sudden all the young people started to wear the same type of uniforms. I mean, clothes, and were repeated. About training and repetition, where repeated the theses of Mao from the red books, and it was just the whole China was covered with this unified people who were like one for everybody. So that is this, you mentioned this fascistic factor behind that. So, I mean, in this, that's why I think what is your name? Susanna mentioned that irony, because of course, when it is in frame of the art exhibition, you have the brackets on everything which is done, so everybody knew it's rather a part of the performance than the real, than the effort to make it real. That's why, just this one.
Can I ask, add something to defend? I really like that, and obviously you wearing the dress not as a part of a performance, or maybe you are, so that's playing double irony. But let me add something. I think it depends on who is playing the language game. Is it the women saying, I am a beautiful woman for myself, I feel it in my body, I feel it walking down that aisle, or is it, well, the morning, you're right. Or is it like, oh, I have to be beautiful, and what do? Okay, I do. So who is playing the language game? And I think a lot of it is women and others, just a diversity of groups of people and individuals claiming that language game for themselves again, and saying, I do that, it's my practice, it's my exercise. And then we can, and that's the theological basis of it, we can go a step further, in order what to do. You say it's for comfort. What's the ultimate where to? I'm moving, but that's a different step.
But I don't know, I think that's just my personal comment, but I still think that all these words and playing around them, it's kind of a limitation, and we really need to go beyond them. And it's probably, irony is probably a way of surpassing this notion of just sincerity, of virtues, and so on and so forth, but still there's much more road after that, because anyhow, the beautiful and the sincere and the confidence and the self-therapeutical still does not fulfill the complexity of what needs to be done, in my view. So, because it doesn't matter if I feel beautiful or I need to feel beautiful. It matters for a certain projection, but actually that should not be the case. Because the experience of what are we naming when we say that. So if I say you should be beautiful, of course it names the experience of the others. If I say I feel beautiful, that it names this kind of self-empowerment, and still it's a super limited way of thinking. So the question is how to even go much beyond that. And that's a question for myself, no? I think also for the audience. Sorry, this is a moment for you to pose questions.
I try to understand. I mean, it was just mentioned, you know, those questions you're having now. One is about the pastiche of a cultural revolution bringing the counter-revolution into capitalism. The other one is the question, how do you want to go beyond language to name the problems, as you just said? If you go back to the 60s and 70s, in fact, I mean, those are the questions, Hélène Cixous, Luce Irigaray, all the feminism, the critical feminism had there, with language. And if you now go we were speaking about the big gap, we go 500 years back with Luther, with the Reformation. And the Reformation was something to free the language. So the Reformation clearly was a huge step to free language from naming God. This is what goes through philosophy up to today, in fact. If you read Hegel about the Reformation and Luther, he says clearly Luther was the one to free language and to bring a radical subjectivity, male or female. So there is something which we have been dealing with for hundreds of years. So I would like to know what is are you going back to this? Do you think that for feminism, are you feeling yourself within this tradition of feminism? I'm asking all the four of you. Or are you, if you say you want to go beyond, I mean, people are speaking today to go beyond the human. This I can understand. But if you want to go beyond feminism, I do not understand. What do you mean by this?
Well, if the question is for me, I would say that feminists, well, then you go.
I don't want to go beyond feminism. So it's not a question to me. And actually, well, okay. But I wanted to show, I think that feminist questions asked in the 60s, 70s are still very important today. And if Luther wanted to free a language, he did not succeed. I just wanted to show you very shortly, because I don't, three projects by Izabela Gustowska, that is a woman artist from Poland, professor at Art Academy. And she organized in 1978, she organized an exhibition, or women-only exhibition. She was a young artist then. She has just graduated from Art Academy, and she organized exhibition for herself and other women artists. And several years ago, she organized again women-only exhibition for her students, for her women students, because she took part in this exhibition as well, but as a professor, but also as one of the colleagues. And she said something like, we still need it. Yes, so that's why I think it's very important. And if I can show you one more project by her, I think it is quite important because it was organized in Grażyna Kulczyk's gallery in Poznan, Art Stations Gallery. It was also her project, New York and the Girl. The starting point for Izabela Gustowska in this project was Josephine Hopper. So, and her situation, Josephine Hopper, that is obviously wife of and model of Edward Hopper, and she concentrated on her as an unfulfilled artist, unfulfilled women artist, because she's known like as a model, yes, not as an artist. And Izabela Gustowska went to New York when Josephine Hopper lived and invited several women artists, not artists, several young women, and she invited them to repeat poses from Edward Hopper's paintings, the poses that Josephine Hopper did, yes. And she asked the question whether, in a say, I am just obviously saying very shortly, yes, describing it very shortly, but she asked the question whether they repeat the fate of Josephine Hopper or not, whether they are able to somehow free themselves from this fate. So I'm just saying this because to say that I still feel that it is very, it's crucial today still, yes, so I don't think we have to go beyond.
Yeah, I mean, on the question of going beyond feminism, it's a tricky one, but I think it's like with any beyond, you don't forget or cut yourself off from the legacy or the history or the, achievements of something, but you kind of try to follow it into a particular conclusion that somehow opens up the frame in a certain way. And I mean, we've said it before, but maybe it bears repeating because these new things do bear repeating. I think it's kind of important to think about, animals and rivers and all kinds of things, but also very much the relationship between people and objects. In particular, perhaps, because I think that if you look at the history of slavery, for instance, and women are somehow implicated into the kind of strata of society that is, men on the one side, women slaves and children and etc. They're disenfranchised, let's say. These are as close to human beings as we have to objects, but that's because we don't treat objects with a lot of respect. So I think we have to keep somehow animating and expanding the frame of what is part of the population or what is part of the society, and what is, part of the kind of, what is part of the society that we somehow are always building when we talk about God, when we talk about empowerment, when we talk about feminism, when we talk about the curriculum, because the curriculum is there, the school curriculum is there to somehow educate a new generation or a new population, etc. So, we're not going to sit in desks with like objects and people and animals together, but if we can reimagine the classroom as something that incorporates them in a more dynamic way, which I really also want to say again, this is not something that's new. It's actually from way further before monotheistic religions. So, yeah.
I could agree on a lot of things you both said, and I could disagree too with this enlarging the circle, but I would like to go beyond all the isms, keeping what we have received and reaching what we haven't. And I think the idea would be something relational, sitting in the classroom, in society, with you and us, and not me and him and her and they. So I think the world beyond feminism and humanism and whatever is a relational world I would like to go into.
So I think on that note, we close the panel. And I thank you for being here and all of you for listening to us. Thank you very much.